we've never had an evening campus-wide leadership series event, so this is very exciting. Oh, okay. But you're going to ruin what my... See, I was going to kind of fib. You ruined it. I was going to say we've never invited anybody back again. For leadership, that's true. Okay. That was my whole introduction. It's blown. Okay. All right. So welcome to the Campus-Wide Leadership Series bonus. And I promised I was going to keep the introduction short. Michael Higson is the only individual we've ever had back for a second leadership visit. So that is, and he's going to tell you a true story of Out of the Ashes of 9/11, Lessons from a Guide Dog and His Master. And it's not only a story of 9/11, but as you'll see, it's a story that's relevant to leadership, to teamwork, to bonding, in this case, between people, but also between a dog and, it's okay to say, and his master?
Sure.
Okay. We're supposed to be politically correct, and I think it's supposed to be a new term, but I haven't learned it yet, and I'm probably too old to. So with that introduction, here is Michael Higson.
Why is it even in a small crowd in a large room, everybody sits at the back and nobody sits in the front? I'm telling you. You guys could all come down close and we could make it nice and cozy, but that's okay. Well, thank you for the introduction. I got to tell you, I was once introduced by a lawyer who, when he came to the podium, he had his hands in his pocket, and he introduced me as Michael Higson and Roselle, two very rare creatures because they were survivors of the World Trade Center. When I got to the podium, I needed to respond to that somehow, I figured. So I said, it seemed to me we had a rarer creature in our midst, and that was a lawyer who kept his hands in his own pockets. It's fun to be back. It's been a very busy 2 days. I was here yesterday and spoke over in the School of Nursing, and today we were over speaking to the occupational therapists, and we did a session at lunch. This is presentation number 6 in 2 days. I feel like a teacher. I'm going to apply for my credential tomorrow. It's a real joy to be able to be here and to visit with you all on Election Day. And, you know, I'm like the rest of the world. I pick on the politicians, but for me, I pick on them because I am so disappointed, like most people are, but my disappointment comes from the fact that none of them seem to have really learned much after 9/11. September 11th, I think, as horrific as it was, September 11th, 2001, such a horrible day, but I think that the positive lessons and the potential for positive lessons and change that came out of September 11th are far greater than even the horrors of the day. And now there may be those who disagree with me, and maybe some of the families would, because they lost people. But still, if the losses, if the horror, if all of the events and the activities of that day mean anything, it can only be because we learn from it. Change is something that we all face all the time, in one way or another. We're used to having things change. We don't like it when things change. We resist change as much as we talk about the need to have it. Just like we talk about teamwork, but we never seem to be able to really form good teams. I think there's some similarities there. But the bottom line is that we just resist change. We resist learning lessons and learn better how to deal with change. And, you know, after 9/11 specifically, we were a very unified country. We had a common enemy, an enemy that deserved the name enemy. We had a goal, something to achieve. And it was in part to avenge what happened on September 11th, but it was also partly dealing with the people who did it and bringing justice and closure to what happened, putting an end to an organization that made a determination to kill so many people, so many innocent people, just to further their own goals and their own means. And I don't refer to the Muslim faith, because I think what happened on September 11th is not a religious war. What happened on September 11th is strictly a war where some selfish group of people, some group of thugs, in the name of religion, decided to commit an act of terror. But over a fairly short period of time, we squandered away an incredible amount of goodwill, an incredible amount of trust, and an incredible amount of potential unity worldwide, because we deviated, we took our eye, if you will, off the ball. And we began to shift, and we began to argue among ourselves, to the extent that now we have so many people so fearful and so unhappy with what we're doing in our country, and I mean our own people, with our whole political system, with our economy, and rightfully so, but they're so unhappy that there is no trust of the people at the top. And it shouldn't be that way. You know, in 2004, I had a chance to meet President Bush. And I will tell you that I'm not necessarily the greatest George W. Bush supporter. In part because of what he did in the year after 9/11. I was perfectly comfortable and applauded his invasion of Afghanistan. I think that's something that we needed to do. We needed to go after Al-Qaeda. And that was well calculated, well started, well done. Then we shifted and added another front to the war. Never a good idea to have two wars going at once, but he did. And we went into Iraq. And as we learned over time, without any real justification other than Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, no doubt and no question that somebody like that had to be dealt with. But that was totally different than what we had begun in Afghanistan. And it took the whole conflict and the whole battle, the whole war, to a completely new level, and has stretched our resources so thin that it has caused, hopefully not irreparable, but certainly significant damage, not only within the psyche of our country, but with our credibility around the world. And yet everyone continues to argue about various aspects of it today, and the politicians are so divided, they have forgotten the concept of teamwork. And no one is working with anyone else. That is never a recipe for success. Because teamwork and leadership are keys that we need to have, that anyone needs to have in order to survive, in order to grow, and in order to become better than they were. We should have the right to expect that those people that we elect lead us in every sense of the true meaning of leadership. They should be providing inspiration. They should be providing guidance. They should also be listening to what we say and taking that into effect when they're providing guidance and counsel and suggestions and putting plans into action. But all we're seeing are knee-jerk reaction after knee-jerk reaction, conflict after conflict at the top, and nothing really is getting accomplished. I'm not here to say whether healthcare is good or whether it's bad. I have my thoughts on the whole concept of healthcare reform, as I'm sure people do. All of you do in one sense, as so many people do. I heard on the news just a while ago, according to exit polls, 48% of people think that healthcare reform should be repealed. And I think that if we drill down on that many people feel that way out of fear of what they think it's going to do to the economy because of what some people have said, rather than, is that a really informed decision? And I guess the other way to put that into perspective is 52% of the people think that it shouldn't be repealed, and do they have good, solid justification for why we should have healthcare reform? We're not getting any of that. We're just getting a bunch of sound bites and reactions, and that's unfortunate. So I really am of the opinion that we have significantly damaged our collective consciousness about change and learning from change and leadership, and we have created such a fearful society that if we don't collectively work to change that, if we don't start to have more confidence in ourselves, if we don't say we're going to work together, and if we don't demand that those at the top of the leadership pool work together, then we have some serious problems far beyond the economy to deal with. Whether this election will change that, whether this election will truly make a difference, time will tell. But I think that is a lesson that we should have learned from 9/11, because the unity we had right after 9/11 was incredible, and I'm sure you all remember it. Everyone was striving for the same thing. There was so much momentum that we've lost, and it's extremely unfortunate. And then, of course, all the political campaign commercials are just a bunch of entertainment and waste of time anyway, because you never learn anything from the campaign commercials. So there is that. But I think that this is all about leadership. And I'm of the opinion that we have a number of people in Washington who truly have leadership potential, but they're not exercising it. And if they don't, then we need to demand that they do, or we need to say that this is something that you shouldn't be doing until you learn how to do it. But that filters down into all of our lives. You know, I work with a guide dog every day. When I go to school to learn to use a guide dog, what I learn first and foremost is not really the techniques of stepping out and walking with the dog, not the commands, but what I truly learn is how to build a team, is how to create a bond with that dog such that we get to the point where we essentially know what each other is doing. We know how each other thinks, and we can work closely together. It's an interdependent relationship. Gandhi talked about it when he said interdependence is and ought to be as much the ideal of man as his self-sufficiency. Because interdependence is something that is all around us and something that we all need and that we all should enjoy, sometimes much more than we do. Maybe a better way to say it is this, that there is no one who has accomplished anything without somewhere having the assistance of someone else. Let me repeat that because I think it's extremely important. No one has accomplished anything without somewhere having the assistance of somewhere else. No matter what you have done, no matter what great papers or documents or books or treatises you've written, no matter what great discoveries you may make in terms of medical science or management or anything else, somewhere you had other help. It could be your teachers who taught you how to think wisely and how to observe and how to ask questions and how to then take the information that you get and create something or whatever. But it still comes down to you all had the assistance of someone else. Richard Feynman, certainly arguably the greatest physicist of the latter half of the 20th century, has written a book, Richard Feynman, Adventures of a Curious Fellow, I think is the title of it. And in the first chapter of that book, he talks about the fact that his father encouraged him to ask questions. General questions like, why do birds fly? You know, all sorts of questions that challenged the mind. And then to seek answers, whether it be from books or other people's research, or perhaps going out and finding the answers for himself. He used that tool, that knowledge, that inquisitive, curious mind that his father helped him develop. He used that to go out into the world of physics and ask why and how and make a difference. But even with his discoveries, even with the work that he did, the comment, the axiom, he had the assistance of someone else, still holds true. And I think that is something that's very important for all of us to keep in mind. We do use the assistance of others and our lives. So I think that interdependence is something that we should encourage, and interdependence with our leaders means if we're going to allow them to be our leaders, then in whether it's in academia, whether it's in politics, whether it's just friends that we regard as leaders and people that we can rely on, relatives, husbands and wives and so on, it all comes down to the same thing, that we should be able to say, I accept you, or you might accept me. We trust each other. We need to have the bond, because the bond makes us stronger. I tell people about the relationship of a human-animal bond and how it's very similar to the human-human bond, except in one real significant area. Notwithstanding the fact that we don't communicate the same way, and I have to learn how to communicate with a dog and understand what my guide dog is communicating to me. The real significant and I think scary part about the human-animal bond is only one side can betray the trust, and it isn't the dog. I've seen dogs who had developed a trust, or who, like most dogs do, have a desire to have a loving, trusting relationship with human beings, and they were abused, and that relationship was destroyed. That level of trust was betrayed by the human. We adopted a dog named Panama. When we met her, she was a 12-year-old golden retriever. She had been raised to be a guide dog back in 1992. But before she became an actual guide dog, she was what they call career change. In other words, she didn't make it to becoming a guide dog. And they just said in her records, which weren't as detailed then as they are now, it had to do with personality. And what I think was that Panama was a very strong-willed golden retriever, which isn't a negative thing. It really probably meant they couldn't find someone to match her with. But Panama went back to live with her puppy raisers, which she did for 5 years until about 1998. Then the puppy raisers had to return her because they said they were moving into an apartment where they couldn't keep a dog. And I'm sure that was something that was heart-wrenching for them to do, because Panama had a lovely, sweet nature. Anyway, she was adopted out to someone in Tucson, Arizona. We don't know much about her life there, except that in 2003, the people who had her decided they didn't want to keep her anymore, and they just shipped her back to guide dogs for the blind, where I've gotten all my dogs, up in San Rafael, California. And that's where we first heard about her. When she arrived at guide dogs, she was filthy. She had bad teeth. She had a big lump on her back. She couldn't walk very well. She completely tuned people out. She acted with great fear and was a dog that was just totally unresponsive to the world around her. They even thought that she was so filthy that she had ringworm, which turned out not to be the case. But she came back a mess. We at the time were doing what was called temporary foster care for dogs. Dogs that came back that needed a place to be outside of the kennels because they didn't like being in a kennel, so they would go to a person's home. So we allowed Panama in our home. They looked at the lump that was on her back that was literally the size of a softball. It turned out to be an infected cyst that they drained, and it eventually cleared up. As I said, Panama tuned everyone out. They thought that she was deaf. We found after a while, as she became a little bit more comfortable in our house, that in fact she could hear. I'm sure that she had some hearing loss. She was at that time basically 12 years old. And she didn't really have total hearing loss, so she responded to some things. It took months to get her even to take a walk with my wife. Now, my wife uses a wheelchair. Panama wasn't afraid of the wheelchair. She was afraid to take a walk. We think that the people who had her before just locked her in a garage and they abused her, and it was just not a good experience. We were able to have Panama for 3 years, and we knew that we had a major breakthrough with her when one day we were going to be taking a trip and we were going to be taking Panama with us. We thought that she was going to be afraid to get in our car because every time we opened the garage door from the house, and urged her to go out and get in the car, she would just shake and shiver. She didn't want to go into the garage. But this particular day, we opened the door, and she shot out of the door like a rocket and right into the car. That was a major breakthrough. It took 3 years to get a real trust level with her, and even then there were times that she reverted to fear reactions. But dogs don't betray trusts like that. And they don't deal with it in terms of what's in it for me if you want me to do something. Well, I take that back. When it comes to be dinner time, they do. Ask Africa down here, my guide dog. Ask Roselle, the retired hero dog from 9/11. She's supposed to eat around 5 in the afternoon. At least that's the dinner time we set. So anytime after 2, she's going to start to push for dinner. It figures if I push the envelope enough, eventually they'll give in. We've resisted well so far. But the point of the story is that it is really difficult to regain trust once you betray it. I think there's so much of a feeling of betrayal of trust in so many ways. Perhaps wrong, perhaps right, probably some of both, but the bottom line is it's there. We have to be more volitional about saying we demand that you earn our trust, and we demand that you earn ours to those around us in everything that we do. And by being open to that concept, which is so much under attack, I mean, look at what companies have done. You've got Enron and Exxon and MCI back in the early 2000s, and just so many things that go on. BP recently, so many different things. And of course, I made jokes about all the campaign commercials that have not had much content, and all they're doing is reinforcing attacks on trust. And that's something that we all need to deal with. And we all need to say, that kind of behavior is unacceptable. And I think the other side of it is, we can do that. I don't think it's a lost cause. I refuse to become less than optimistic about the potentials that we have. I think that is a lesson that we can have from 9/11, because no matter what happened on September 11th, 2001, we have demonstrated that we can move forward. So many people have moved on from that day. There are also a number of people who are still paralyzed with fear and who have not. But it's now more a choice. Oh, it always was, but more people who are just not moving on have had a number of opportunities, and if they can't move on, all we can do is to try to set examples and help them move on. Everyone says we're going to be attacked again sometime in the future, and yes, it could happen unless our vigilance is just better than the bad guys. And so far, we've been able to hold our own, but they're going to keep trying, and we have to be creative and keep trying too. Nevertheless, we know that we can be resilient. We know that we can survive lots of things. But we also ought to know that if we're smart about what we do, we can make it easier to not have to go into survival mode, but to move forward with joy and confidence and make the world a better place. So if that sounds like a bunch of general platitudes, I guess you can think of it that way, but I believe in reality we have the control and the power to do that. For my part, I live in a world that says you can't do what I can do. I live in a world that says blindness really means to most people less than total competence. That it is a difference that says you can't see, you can't do what I can do. And I face that every day in so many ways. I see it even in medical situations. Earlier this year, my wife had to have surgery. When I was waiting for her in the hospital, I didn't have information about how to inquire about how the surgery was going. Every sighted person could go call a phone number that was displayed on the wall next to a wall phone, but no one gave me that information. I didn't know for the longest time that there was even a phone there. A well-run organization that was sensitive to persons with disabilities should have made sure I knew that up front. My wife, the next day after her surgery, and it was hand surgery on her left thumb, the next day she had to be subjected to most of a day where, even though she asked several times to get help catheterizing herself so that she could go to the bathroom, they ignored her. They had a bedpan there, but when she said, "I need a catheter," she went like 9 hours without being able to cath. There's no need for that kind of situation to happen in today's modern society that is supposed to be so sensitive to other people's needs. But the reality is we're not there yet. I've had situations where I take certain kinds of medications and I would refill a prescription, and when the prescription arrived, the pills were different. But there was no mechanism to inform me, other than the print brochure that they sent with it, to tell me that I no longer had 50 milligram pills but had 25 milligram pills. And it was more than a week before I learned that I was taking half the dose I was supposed to take. And again I say, today, there's no need for that kind of situation ever to occur. It happens way too much to be considered an oversight. It really means that we haven't progressed as far as we should. And I realize there are so many things going on in our lives and so many things going on in our society. But if we don't start making number one priority connecting with people and really working together and recognizing that differences only present opportunity, not pity, not less competence, not inability, until we really deal with that, then we're not going to see the social acceptance of persons with disabilities or people who have other differences. And you all can certainly help make that happen in the way you behave here or in hospitals or wherever you go. You know, the world of ophthalmology is incredible. If a person loses their eyesight while under the care of an ophthalmologist, or if a blind person goes into an ophthalmologist's office, as I often do, we're viewed as a failure because they couldn't fix our eyes. And ophthalmologists around the country will tell you that. I couldn't fix this person's eyes, I failed. Rather than saying, I wish I could have helped, but on the other hand, it's not the end of the world. Our media treats us like pariahs almost. Earlier this year, there was a report that was done by Sharon Alfonsi, one of the correspondents for ABC News. And she reported on a video that has been all over YouTube. It was about a woman in Georgia who fell off of a subway platform onto the subway tracks. The woman was blind. She fell onto the tracks. People saw it. They leaped down onto the tracks, even though a train was coming, to pull her to safety. The engineer saw it, slammed on the brakes, and the bottom line is the woman survived. When they interviewed this woman, who was a very elderly lady, a dialysis patient, again, a blind dialysis patient, the first thing we heard on the report was, yeah, I fell on the tracks, but I never use my cane when I'm in a structure. I don't need to because I can see where I am. Well, the last time I checked, if you were blind, even if you had some vision, and if you carried a white cane, if you didn't use it, you were very likely to misstep. And that's exactly what this woman did because she wasn't using her cane. The reporter never addressed that issue. Rather, she did something else. During the interview, she said, well, I want to know what you thought or what it was like because I know certainly when any blind person goes out, it must be terrifying. So what was it like for you? What kind of image does that portray to all of society? It's terrifying whenever a blind person travels, whenever they leave their home. It's amazing how many people think they're experts on blindness even though they've never been blind. The fact is that just because you can see doesn't make you an expert on not being able to see. In fact, you've been able to live very comfortably for the past 150 years since Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, giving you the ability to see in the dark. But the fact of the matter is, from my perspective, you're all disabled because you're light dependent. You can't get around without light. Try it sometime and see where it gets you on the subway system without lighting. You'll fall on those subway tracks. So as they say with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the electric light bulb was just a reasonable accommodation to help you light-dependent disabled people get around in the dark. Get out of that one now. You know, and the reality is that we all have challenges. But since there are more people who can see than there are people who don't see, you think that you're in a better situation. Another example I love to use just to drive the point home a little bit more clearly, Dr. Richard Becker, who's a medical correspondent for ABC, I watch ABC a bunch, did a report earlier this year on using one's own stem cells from their eyes to regrow a person's cornea after the cornea is damaged. And the story that he gave was about a person who worked in a steel manufacturing plant where there was an accidental fire and this person lost their sight. The report was great because it showed how science was going to bring this person's cornea back by using their own stem cells. But what he did was, to set the stage, he started his story with this sentence: imagine, in a moment, the beauty of life gone forever. Since when do you have to see to be able to experience the beauty of life? We have not developed the sensitivity and the knowledge that we need to. So when I experienced the events of 9/11, my decision was a conscious one that if people wanted to hear me speak, I would travel to try to educate people about blindness, to educate people about persons with disabilities in general, and to educate people to the fact that we are in control of making our world a better world and trying to help people not only move on from 9/11, but move on from preconceived stereotypes and notions that don't happen to be true. So to sum it up, blindness isn't the handicap that I face. The handicap I face consists of the poor attitudes and misconceptions that I might have about myself as a blind person, and it consists of the poor attitudes and misconceptions, especially, that others have about what it means to be blind. We live in a society, according to the Gallup polling organization, where 76% of people fear blindness over any other physical disability. We live, according to the Gallup polling organization, in a society where one of the top 5 fears is going blind. And it's all because of prejudice and misconception. It's all because we don't trust our instincts to do anything other than using what we're used to. We're not taught to go beyond, in this case, being able to see, to maybe using other senses that might help us. We're not taught to be curious. We're not being taught nearly as much today as we should be to trust. We're not taught a lot of things that we need to learn. I think I speak from conviction in talking about this because of what happened to me on 9/11. I work, as I said, with a guide dog every day. We have to trust each other. I save her life just as much as she saves mine. I worked in the computer industry for over 27 years, my last job working for Quantum Corporation, a company that makes what are called disaster recovery or tape backup products. Products that we sell to organizations so that they can record all their computer transactions, then send the tapes off-site somewhere so that if there's ever an emergency, they've got a copy of their files. Something the Security and Exchange Commission requires in New York, something that a lot of companies require as a standard policy, so they don't lose their records. So I was the district sales manager at Quantum Corporation in New York City. In August of 2000, we opened our office in the World Trade Center on the 78th floor, which is really a cool place to be. We were in what was called a Sky Lounge, on the Sky Lounge floor. There were elevators that ran directly from the first floor to the 78th floor, nonstop, 48 seconds to get from the first to the 78th floor. The elevators ran at 22 miles an hour. I listened to tour guides give the story in the elevators going to Windows of the World. I knew all these stats. It's fun to tell people them. The elevators were large enough that they were as big as my office, some of the offices I've had. I love to tell people that one of these days I was going to take over one of the elevators and just use it for my office all the time. would have been great to have a desk in there, and then I can rise above it all. Oh, anyway, so I traveled into the World Trade Center every day. I learned how to travel around the World Trade Center. I learned every nook and cranny by wandering around and getting lost and forcing myself to get lost so I could figure out how to find out where I needed to go. It was amazing how many times people said, "Oh, let me just take you." And I say, No, just tell me where I am if I got lost. It got to the point where I never could get lost because I always could figure out where I was. And I took shortcuts that most people didn't know about through parking lots on the 4th sublevel and so on to get around. But I did that so that I could independently travel anywhere in the World Trade Center. Also, I did it so that I could go one of several ways to get from any place to any other place so that the dog wouldn't get into the habit of going the same way all the time. Because I don't want a dog to be into the habit of just going one way to get somewhere, and then what do you do if that way is not available to you? So I spent a lot of time learning how to travel around the World Trade Center and then expanded it to being able to get around most of New York. Columbus Circle and the rabbit warren of down in the Soho area can be a real challenge, but Little Italy are actually not so much there. But yeah, Soho is a crazy place, and the Village is pretty crazy. But most of New York is laid out pretty well and easy to get around. And besides, my favorite restaurants were up in the easy part to get around. You want good barbecue outside Kansas City, go to Virgil's in New York City. Anyway, so we worked in the World Trade Center. I learned how to get around. I had an office there. And on September 11th, I was in my office. My employees were not. They were out selling, doing what they were supposed to do, while I was going to be conducting 4 training seminars to teach some of our reseller partners how to sell our products. We had set this up a month before. A colleague from our corporate office had arrived to be part of the seminars because he had account responsibility for some of the people who were going to be in that day. His name was David Frank. I knew David actually from a previous job. We both came to Quantum. He lived out in California, and by that time I had been transferred to and was living in New Jersey and working in New York. And took the train in every day, like countless thousands of people do, to get into the city. But for me it was great. I had a ride from my house to the train station on a bus, and so I had to stand outside sometimes in the cold weather waiting for the train. But once I got on a train, I went into Newark, and underground I could transfer to another train and arrive underground in the World Trade Center and never have to go outside, so it was really convenient. Until I had to go on a sales call with someone. But the dogs liked the snow, so we coped. So on September 11th, I was in my office. David Frank was there. We had some guests in our conference room. We had ordered breakfast for them, some of the best ham and cheese croissants I ever tasted, from the Port Authority cafeteria on the 44th floor in the World Trade Center. Something we'll miss a lot. At 8:45, our guests were in the conference room waiting for others to arrive. The PowerPoint projector was set up. I was going to be doing the PowerPoint show. It's fun to have a blind person do a PowerPoint show because everybody's curious how you're going to do it. I have a laptop just like anyone else, except the laptop very quietly talks and tells me what slide I'm on. I have a script in Braille that not only tells me the words that are being displayed on the screen, but I write down specific details about every picture. I have someone describe all that, or I have them create the document. And I even have the script be so detailed as to tell me where on the screen each picture appears. So, for example, if I'm talking about 2 of our different products, one that's a very large product that has like up to 16 tape drives, and the other one has 1 or 2, I can say, if you look to your left, you'll see and hear the speeds and feeds and all the details about it, and on your right, you can see this one, and I can point back over my shoulder and never have to turn and look at the screen. Try it sometime. I can do it. Bet you can. Anyway, it's really great because people would come up to me afterwards and they say, we forgot that you were blind, but you never looked away. You never looked at the screen. We didn't dare fall asleep. And I said, you bet you don't dare fall asleep because the dog is taking notes and we'd get you anyway. But, we were prepared to do all of that. David and I were in my office when suddenly we heard a muffled explosion. We felt the building kind of lurch, and then it began to tip. And if you imagine my arm as the World Trade Center tower, it just started tipping and tipping and tipping and moving over. I guess that won't work as a World Trade Center tower, so I'll use my arm. It just kept tipping and tipping and tipping. We knew it wasn't an earthquake because it wasn't shaking around. It was just going in one direction. We learned later that that's exactly what it should do. The buildings were constructed with expansion joints because the Empire State Building had been hit by an aircraft in the 1940s, and it also had been constructed with expansion joints. It's basically, buildings are constructed like large springs when they're very tall, so that they can be buffeted in the winds, they can be struck by something and survive it. We didn't know any of that on September 11th, but that's what was going on. We actually moved about 20 feet. As soon as the building started to move, having grown up in Southern California, right along the San Andreas Fault, I moved over to the doorway and stood in the doorway. Having a master's degree in physics, I know that the archway is the structure that is the strongest part of any building, and so the closest to an archway is a doorway. So I went and stood in the doorway. A lot of good it's going to do me 78 floors up, right, if the building tips over, but hey, you do what you can. And so I stood in the door as the building tipped. David was holding on to my desk, and we were speculating about what happened. I said, what do you think it is? And he said, I don't know, an explosion or what? I don't know. I said, I don't know what it is. But we knew that the building kept tipping, and we finally said goodbye to each other because we thought we were going to take a 78-floor plunge to the street. Because the building was moving and it wasn't stopping. Then it stopped. And it started coming back the other way, slowly. And eventually, it reached its normal position. As soon as it did, I went into my office from the doorway, and I met Roselle coming out from under my desk. I had left her under the desk because I thought she was probably safer there than anywhere else. So when I went into the office and I met her coming out from under the desk, I told her to heel, which is a command to come around on my left side. Come on, heel. And sit, which is exactly what she did, which is what Africa has done. And if I haven't introduced her before, this is Africa. She's a 3.5-year-old yellow lab. And at the end of the lecture, if you want, I'll show you what happens when you take the harness off of a working dog. She doesn't act like she's working, if you catch my drift. She gets bored. She wants to play. If I take the harness off, she's going to be running around the room faster than you. So anyway, I had Roselle sit, and about that time, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet. Now, today we know that was because the expansion joints were going back into their normal position. The spring was collapsing and getting back to its normal position. But we didn't know that on 9/11. As soon as the building stopped moving, David, who was holding onto my desk, released his hold and turned around and looked out our windows. We had windows all across the front of our offices. Sit. He looked out the window and he started shouting, Mike, oh my God, there's fire and smoke above us. There are millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside our window. The building's on fire. We got to get out of here right now. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, yeah, there's fire and smoke. We got to get out of here. There are millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside our window. We got to get out of here right now. And I said, slow down, David. He said, no, we can't. We got to get out of here. I could hear debris falling outside our window. I wasn't smelling smoke, but I believed that that was what David was seeing. I mean, why not? The building had just moved 20 feet. Something happened. And he's seeing fire and smoke. And of course, he was seeing the fire and smoke because the airplane, which had hit on the 96th floor on the other side of our building, had blown a hole through the entire building. And things were being sucked out. And so he was seeing fire and smoke, no question about it. And we got to get out of here right now. And I kept saying, slow down. Our guests began to scream. They started moving toward the exit. So you got the picture. The sighted guy's seeing all this stuff and the blind guy's saying, slow down. What are you going to do? Who are you going to believe? Except for one thing. In all that was happening, I was observing something that David was not. I was observing something that nobody saw. Namely, a dog that was sitting just like Africa is doing now, just wagging her tail every so often and yawning, and not in any way indicating that she felt endangered. She wasn't trying to pull me to the door. And you've seen or read stories about dogs that rescue people because they're in burning buildings and the dog senses it and so on. Roselle wasn't acting that way. She wasn't giving any indication of fear. So I made the judgment call as leader in that office that we could try to evacuate normally, under the rules and the procedures that the Port Authority had set up for evacuation in emergencies. I had been through all the preparedness drills and the fire drills. I did all of that because I knew that I might either be in the office alone or have to get other people out if there were ever an emergency. So I took the responsibility of making sure I knew what to do. Also, unlike you guys, I can't read the signs on the walls that say, here's where the exits are, or here's what you got to do. And neither would you be able to read them if you were in a smoke-filled hallway. But I knew that I had to learn what to do. It was my responsibility as the leader of the office. And of course, as I look back on it, obviously I was preparing myself in case there was an emergency, and I was mentally preparing for the possibility that it would occur. And sure enough, it did. I finally got David to focus and said, look, get our guests to the stairs, come back, we will sweep the office, make sure that there's no one else or anything else, but get these people to the stairs. Don't let them take the elevators, because since there is fire, it could get into the elevators, and that would be a serious problem. And of course, that did happen to people. David got them to the stairs. Meanwhile, I called my wife, Karen. I told her that there had been an explosion or something had happened. She was just starting to move around. And I think I told you earlier that she is in a chair, but she is able to, she's a paraplegic, she can do things on her own. It's a great relationship. She reads, I push. Not anymore, she uses a power chair. But you know, I love to tell people that when I was growing up, people would ask me what I wanted to be, and I kept saying I wanted to be a pusher. You know, we were out in California in the drug culture. I want to be a pusher when I grow up, man, you know. So I married her, and it became legal. Worked out really well. So anyway, I called Karen. It was long before the media got the story, so I broke it to her that we were leaving because there had been an explosion or something. Something had happened, and I'd call her as soon as I could. Then David came back. We collected some stuff because I was going to take, not my laptop, but I took some personal stuff and important papers and had them in a briefcase that I carried on my back, and we left. David had his laptop. He was silly. He took his laptop. Laptops were heavy in 2001. I also obeyed the precepts of my own company. I had all my data backed up at home, so I could work from home just as quickly and easily as I could in the office. So I didn't need to take the laptop because all my data was there. So we went to the stairs, and by 8:50 we had started down. Come on, Africa. We had begun our descent to get out. Almost immediately from the time that we started down the stairs, I began smelling an odor. It took me a while to realize that what I was smelling was something that I knew was familiar, but I couldn't place. Finally I did, and I said to people, you know, I'm smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel. I'd been around airports a lot and traveled a lot, and I recognized finally that I was smelling that burning kerosene smell. And others said, yeah, you're right. We must have been hit by an airplane. And so that was our assumption as we went down the stairs. We didn't know for sure, but that was our assumption. So we continued to walk down. The smell was fairly strong. As we went down the stairs, sometimes it was stronger and sometimes it was less strong. It was always with us. We got down about 10 floors, and then suddenly we heard from above us somebody shout, there's a burn victim coming through, move to the side of the stairs. Well, the stairs were wide enough that we could step back and allow the center part of the stairs to be open for someone to pass, or the inside rail to be available. Soon a group of people passed us in front of a woman who was very badly burned over the upper part of her body and her face and so on. She had to be in shock, but she was ambulatory and she was walking down the stairs. I think we were all in shock. We continued then down the stairs, and soon we heard a voice, burn victim coming through, move to the side. Someone even, I think, worse than the first, as David described it to me, passed us, being helped by others. And they were gone. From that, I think we realized how bad it had to be up above where whatever had occurred was playing out. And because I think we we suddenly realized that it was so bad. A woman near us on the stairs stopped and she just said, "I can't breathe, I can't go on, we're not going to make it out of here." And we all stopped. There were about 8 or 9 of us who had collected on the stairs from different offices. We didn't know each other. But we all stopped and surrounded this lady and had a group hug, literally, and said, "Come on, we're in this together. You can keep going down the stairs. We're with you. You're with us. We'll make it, but we got to work together." And she was able to keep going. That's teamwork. That's support. So we continued down the stairs, walked several more floors, and then suddenly my friend David said, "Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here." That's all I needed to hear. I thought we'd been through that, David. Anyway, so I just said to him, "Stop it, David. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you." He told me later that snapping at him like that, and I was very volitional and deliberate about it, snapping at him like that brought him kind of back to his senses and out of the funk that he was drifting into. He did something that I thought was really pretty amazing. He left me and walked a floor further down the stairs and paced, staying a floor ahead of me, and started shouting up to me, but in reality to all the hundreds of people above him who could hear his voice. He started shouting everything that he saw. You know, floor 48, we're okay, everything is clear. 47, 46, floor 45, I see the sign, I'm on the 45th floor. Floor 44, hey, this is the door to the cafeteria for the Port Authority. 43, everything is okay. He told me that was his way of keeping his mind off his fears. But he became a beacon and a scout for so many people. 42, 41, floor 40, everything's good, we're going down, everything's okay. I was up above him a floor, 19 stairs above him. There were 19 stairs between floors. I don't count stairs, but for something to do, I started not counting all the stairs, but started observing that there were 19 stairs between floors. So what does that mean? I started on the 78th floor, and then on the first floor, 77 flights, 77 times 19. Very quick. Too late. 1,463. At least it was going down. So I was dealing with my own concerns, and I realized, though, that I didn't dare express fear or nervousness for Roselle's sake. If I wanted her to guide, I needed her to think that I was okay and that she didn't need to worry about me, because our relationship is so empathetic and so interdependent that if I started sounding nervous, she's going to be nervous and she's going to be looking back at me rather than focusing on looking straight ahead. So I kept telling her, "Good girl, good job, Roselle, keep going, hop up," which is a command to pay attention and sometimes to speed up. "Good girl, keep going, good job." At the bottom of each stairwell, each flight, left, go to the next set of stairs. "Roselle, forward," and go down the stairs. "Good girl, left, forward." "Good girl, you're doing a good job." Left, forward, and continuing down. 38, 37th floor, everything is good here. Don't see any obstacles or anything on the floors. In the stairwells, everything looks good. 36, I did have a fear. And it was a fear that no matter how much I worked with Roselle, I could not shake. And the fear was this. People were walking down these stairs. They were able to go because we had lights. And I was afraid that there was the possibility, which did happen later, but we were out of the building, that power and lighting would disappear. And suddenly the stairs would be thrust into darkness. And I would be stuck on the stairs with thousands of functionally blind, light-dependent people who couldn't find their way out of a paper bag and who would probably panic. We were working really hard to keep panic from occurring, but ultimately, I had to worry about that because I didn't want to get killed in the stampede of people falling and panicking and all that. So I said to people as we were on the stairs, "Now, I don't want anyone to worry. If the lights go out, Roselle and I are here, and we're offering a half-price special to get you out today only. Hey, I also sell for a living. I got to make some money out of the deal, right?" Anyway, I didn't know how many people might remember that if we really had a situation, but it did. First of all, it made me feel good. And second of all, it did serve notice that if the lights did go out, I was going to deal with it. And I thought about how I could suddenly give quick instruction to these people and get them to focus and get them to be able to continue to go down the stairs. Because I would have been the only one to do it in a totally dark environment until people's eyes adjusted to the extent that they might be able to have enough night vision to see. And not everybody's going to have night vision anyway. They needed to learn techniques, and I was going to have to do it in a hurry if the need arose. There was no sense instructing anyone before there was that need. Nobody'd listen. 35, 34. We went down the stairs, we conversed, we talked about what was going on, we speculated about what had happened. And it got suddenly quiet. I think people were just kind of lapsing into their own worries and so on. So I said, you know, everybody, they're not going to allow us back into these buildings for a while, but on the day that they do, let's all meet on the 78th floor at 8:45 when this all started, and let's walk down the stairs together. What a great way to lose weight, huh? And people laughed, which is what I intended. I also point out I wasn't dumb enough to say, let's start at the bottom floor and go up. That master's degree in physics came in handy about recognizing a little bit about gravity. And so people laughed, and they were able to start talking again. 33, 32, 31, 30. Hey, everybody, firemen are coming up the stairs. Everybody move to the side, let the firemen come by. People moved to the side of the stairs. I went on down to where David was, and I said, tell me what you're seeing, because they weren't here yet. As we learned later, it took about a minute for the firemen to go from one floor up to the next. It took us about 20 seconds to go down from one floor to the next. Because, as David described it, he said, I see the firemen, they're dressed in their heavy protective clothing, and they're carrying on their backs all the stuff that they need to fight the fire. Oxygen cylinders, shovels, axes, all the stuff that they need, and they're in this heavy clothing. They must be carrying 100 pounds on their back, he said. I don't know how much they were really carrying, but that's worked for me. That's what he was saying. Then the first guy got to us. He stopped and he went, hey, buddy, you okay? You know how they talk in New York, right? Yo. And I said, look, we're okay. Don't worry about us. Oh, that's really good. Glad to hear it. But we're going to send somebody down the stairs with you to make sure you get out. And I said, look, you don't need to worry about that. Because now I'm confronted by this guy who wants to help me get down the stairs. He's not going to be of an aid to me. I'm using the stair rails or I'm using the guide dog, and I go down the stairs just fine. You can't get lost in a stairwell going down, especially with everybody else doing it. But this guy decided that he had to make sure that I got escorted down. I'm sitting there, meanwhile, going, there's something horrific going on up above. If I take a fireman and accept that help, they're not going to be doing what they're supposed to be. And that could be disastrous if suddenly the person wasn't where they needed to be and something happened. And I wasn't about to be responsible for that. So I said, look, don't worry about it. I'm okay. I've got a guide dog here in Africa. Roselle and I are going down the stairs just fine together. And he said, well, that's really nice. What a nice dog. But we're going to send somebody with you. And he starts petting Roselle. It wasn't the time to give them a lecture about don't pet a guide dog that's working in harness, you know. And it was also not the time to give them a lecture about, look, whether you like it or not, blindness isn't the handicap I face. It's attitudes and misconceptions. It wasn't the time to do that. So I just said, finally, look, you really don't have to go with me down the stairs or send someone with me. I've got my friend David here who can see. We're fine. So he turns to David. You with him? And David said, yeah, don't worry about him. He's good. And the guy finally said, okay. He gave Roselle one last pet. She gave him a kiss. Probably the last unconditional love he ever got in his life, because then he went on upstairs. Perhaps never to be seen again. I always want to honor the memory of the firemen and all the heroes that we lost on 9/11, and even the heroes that we didn't lose who behaved so well on that day and days after. But I refuse to have a moment of silence and mourn their passing. I think, and I know from talking to many firemen since 9/11, that they would want their colleagues' memories to be celebrated and remembered in a positive way. So instead of having a moment of silence, I ask, and I'm asking you now, would you just give a round of applause for all the heroes of 9/11? And I'm sure wherever they are, they heard that, and I thank you on their behalf. We've had 50 firemen pass us, and a woman, or firewomen as well, pass us going up the stairs as we continued down. Our descent was slowed because we didn't have as much room on the stairwell. People couldn't walk 2 and 3 abreast. David did reassume his scouting position and continued calling up 29, 28, 27. Where did it go? 26. And as he continued to describe what was occurring, he suddenly said, hey, they're passing bottles of water up the stairs, and he brought a bottle up to me. Somebody said they had just opened one of the water vending machines on one of the floors. I wonder how they opened it. Always wondered that. Anyway, they were passing up bottles of cold water. So David and I and Roselle shared a bottle. Roselle was getting pretty thirsty. It was getting pretty hot. And she had come down so many floors. We went down the stairs, having had some water, a little bit better for Roselle. We just kind of made cups out of our hands to give her some. David reassumed the scout position. 20, 19, continued to shout up to people, everything is clear, there's still firemen coming up the stairs. 50 pass us. Finally, floor 2, I'm at the first floor, there are water sprinklers, you're going to have to run through the sprinklers to get out of the stairwell, and then he was gone. I got to the first floor and heard this torrential downpour of water. I think that what they were doing was having the sprinklers run to keep a curtain between the stairwell and the outside, either to keep fire in the stairwell if fire had gotten in and started down, or if there was fire in the lobby of Tower 1, it would keep it out of the stairwell so it wouldn't get a chance to go up. Sensible kind of a precaution. But I got down to the first floor. I heard this cacophony of water. I took Roselle's harness and told her to go forward, hop up, and we burst through this curtain of water, finally to the outside. We ended up in the lobby of Tower 1, normally a typical quiet office building, but now just this incredible chaotic scene. Everybody was shouting, go over here, don't go outside, you can't go outside, you got to go this way. And they were sending people through the revolving doors into the central part of the World Trade Center, which was a shopping mall on the first floor. A shopping mall that had all the usual kinds of places like a Hallmark bookstore, a Radio Shack, a Duane Reade drugstore. There were all the different banks had offices there. Then there were the more relevant and pertinent places, Godiva Chocolate, the Fine and Shapiro Deli. There was a Japanese restaurant there. Krispy Kreme donut cart outside, the important stuff. And so we ran through this shopping mall, normally full of thousands of people, now totally empty as they had been evacuated. We raced through to an escalator and went up the escalator and finally out a door that was as far away from the Twin Towers as we could be. All we were told as we were going outside was leave the complex. We got outside and didn't leave right away because David looked around and he said, Mike, I see smoke up in the second tower. I said, what are you talking about? He says, there's smoke and fire up there. I see fire. Well, what do you think caused that? I don't know. Got any idea? No, I don't have any idea, David. One explanation that was as good as any is that when our building was tipping, it was tipping toward Tower 2, that maybe the fire had just jumped across. We didn't know. This gets back to, I would have much preferred to have information because I probably wouldn't have gone where I did go, that David and I wouldn't have gone where we did if we had known what had actually been going on. You'll see. We left the complex, we circled around to get to Broadway, and we started walking up Broadway to get toward Midtown Manhattan. We were traveling north. We were on the west side or the left side of the street as we went north, so there were buildings right on my left side. We crossed a few streets. We got to Fulton Street. We crossed Fulton Street. Then we went up to the next street, which I believe was Ann Street. Ann put us diagonally right across from Tower 2. If I had walked across Ann, then turned right and walked across Broadway, I would have been at Tower 2. David saw the fire way up in Tower 2 and said, I want to take some pictures. So we stopped because we didn't know. He took out his camera and started taking pictures. I took out my cell phone and tried to call my wife. I couldn't get through because the circuits were busy. Excuse me. Now, as we know, it's because people were saying goodbye. People who were trapped above where the planes hit. But I didn't know it at the time. So I put my phone away. David was just putting his camera away when a police officer yelled, "Get the hell out of here, it's coming down!" And suddenly we heard this rumble that became this very deafening roar, this incredible cacophony of sound. I describe it as kind of a combination of a freight train and a waterfall. You could hear the glass breaking and tinkling and falling. You could hear the metal ripping apart and crashing down. Freight train waterfall sound is probably as accurate of a description as I can give you. Everyone knew the building was coming down. They just turned and ran. David ran. He wasn't helping. Nobody was helping anyone. Nobody was assisting. The only team I think that was going on and working at the time was Roselle and me. I bodily lifted Roselle and turned around and started running back the way we had come, back toward Fulton Street, which put the building that I was talking about earlier on my right-hand side. So I started running and telling Roselle, hop up, keep going, good girl. And we ran as fast as we could. We don't normally do a lot of running, but we did that day. And I remember thinking to myself as we ran, God, how could you allow us to get out of a building just to have it fall on us? And I'll tell you, and I don't share it a lot, but I'm going to share it tonight. As soon as I did that, I heard a voice in my head, as clearly as you hear me, that said, don't worry about what you can't control. Focus on running with Roselle and what you can control, and the rest will take care of itself. And I had this inner peace that if Roselle and I worked together, we could be and we would be okay. So I just continued to urge her and work. I don't know whether she could hear me or other than dealing with hand signals, but she ran. She weaved in and out of people, and people passed us. We tried to stay as close to the building as we could because there was an overhang above us, and that partially protected us from flying debris, although I did get hit in the ear and the head a couple of times with small rocks. But we ran, finally got to Fulton Street, turned right on Fulton Street, ran a few steps, caught up to David. David had stopped, realizing that he had run off and got separated from me, and we happened to both go in the same way. And so when I caught up with him, he apologized. I'm sorry I ran and left you. I said, David, don't worry about it. Let's keep going. You know, I know the area, but I understood what he was saying. And so I said, don't worry about it. We got to keep going, though, and get away from this place. The building's coming down. So we started to run, and almost immediately we're engulfed in the dust cloud. The debris, the fine particles of Tower 2 breaking up. David said that the air was so thick with dirt that you couldn't see your hand 6 inches in front of your nose. I can tell you that it was so thick that you could feel it going down your throat with every breath we took. There was more dirt and debris and dust in the air than there was air. We were drowning in it. And suddenly our priority changed from running away from that building to trying to get inside out of the air. So I started looking, and we all started looking for an entrance on our right to the building. And I kept telling Roselle, right, right. I don't know whether she could hear me over the noise. I hoped that she could see my hand signals. Right, Roselle, good girl, come on, right. Hurry up, hop up, right. We kept running. We didn't find an entrance. And then suddenly I heard an opening on my right. Roselle obviously saw it. She turned right, she took one step, and she stopped dead. Wouldn't move. Now, I know that we were working so well as a team that if she stopped like that, there had to be a reason. So I did what I am trained to do in working with a guide dog. I reached out with the right foot. I also just stuck my hand out to the right, discovered a stair rail, and discovered that we were at the top of a flight of stairs. Roselle had done exactly what she was supposed to do. She stopped at the top of the flight of stairs. I told her to go forward. She went down the stairs, just as pretty as you please, and we got to the bottom to discover that we were at the opening of the entrance to the Fulton Street subway station. In this little arcade at the bottom of the stairs, there was a woman who was crying, saying, "I can't see, my eyes are filled with dirt, someone help me, I don't want to fall into the subway." I ended up being very close to her, so I reached out and I took her arm and I said, "Hey, don't worry. I happen to be blind, but I've got a guide dog, and Roselle will make sure that neither of us fall down the stairs. You're okay." How quickly teamwork reasserted itself. And she must have accepted what I had to say, because she took a hold of my arm, and I said, I introduced myself, and she introduced herself as Carol, and I said, "Look, just go ahead and clean out your eyes. You're okay. You're not near the stairs." I also knew the subway station, and I knew we weren't near the stairs, but she wouldn't know that. So she was able to clean her eyes, but also about that time a gentleman came up the stairs from further down in the subway system, and he said that his name was Lou, he was an employee of the subway system, and that we should go with him. He would take us down to an employee locker room where there were fans and a water fountain and benches to sit on. So we followed Lou down and into the locker room, and we stayed there about 10 minutes, hacking and just trying to clear our lungs. After about 10 minutes, a police officer came and said, "The air's clear up above and you need to leave now." He waited for no discussion. We followed him up the stairs, through the arcade, up the stairs to the outside, to discover that the air was a little bit better. We got outside, and David looked around and said, "Oh my God, Mike, there's no Tower 2 anymore." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "There's no Tower 2. I said, "What do you see?" He said, "All I see are pillars of smoke, hundreds of feet tall." We stood there in shock, and then eventually agreed to just continue to walk west on Fulton and get away from there. We walked and eventually decided we'd try to get back up toward Broadway past the towers, or what was left. And had gotten so far as to being in a little plaza when suddenly we heard the freight train waterfall sound again, and we knew that it was our tower that was collapsing. It had to be. We thought we were far enough away that we wouldn't be hit by flying debris. Nevertheless, David looked around and he saw that there was another dust cloud coming, so we ran to the side to get out of the path of most of the dust. And we stood there with our hands covering our faces and waiting for the stuff to go by, and it did. And when the sound died away and the winds stopped, we opened our eyes, and David looked around and he said, "Oh my God, Mike, there's no World Trade Center anymore." We couldn't comprehend it. We just stood there. Had to be in shock. We were speechless. After a couple of minutes, I said, "I got to try to call Karen and see if there's any way to get through." And I called and was able to get through on my cell phone. And after some tears on both sides of the phone, she's the one who told us how 2 planes had deliberately been crashed by terrorists into the towers, 1 into the Pentagon, and a 4th was still missing over Pennsylvania. To think that we had gone into that building 3 hours before, and because of what some thugs decided to do in the blink of an eye, the world had changed. And if you want to put it this way, oh yes, it was because of their teamwork. Have to acknowledge it. We were stunned, and then finally started to move and eventually started walking up toward Midtown. It's a long ways away. We got up to Canal Street and stayed in a little plaza and sat down to rest for a while. I had a pocket radio in my briefcase and took it out and turned it on and listened to Rudy Giuliani telling everyone to move up north and to get far away from the towers. There were fears of gas leaks and other things. So we continued to walk north and eventually stopped at a little Vietnamese restaurant in Chinatown just for a place to be. And I insisted that we order some food because David was really shaken. We both were, but I wanted David to eat something, and not that either of us did much of that. But we were there for about an hour and a half. And while we were there, suddenly we heard planes flying through the sky. About 12 noon. There was this collective intake of breath. Oh my God, what now? But some people ran outside, and suddenly there was this wild burst of applause as we learned our guys were flying the skies, and the air was, we thought, safe again. David called a friend of his, Nina Resnick, and said that we were coming up toward Midtown, and she lived at 17th and 6th or somewhere around there, or Park or something like that. Anyway, he told her that we had come from the World Trade Center, and she invited us to come to her apartment. We got there about 1:50 or so, and she wasn't there. She had gone out to buy some food in case we hadn't eaten anything. She arrived about 2 or a little after. We went to her apartment and turned on the radio and just sat trying to make sense of it all and listening to NPR talking about what was occurring. David took out his laptop that he carried, and he decided to write down his recollections of what was occurring. So he got the first notes of everything that was happening on 9/11 from his perspective. About 4:30, I got a message from my wife that the trains had started running again, and some people were leaving the city, and I decided that I wanted to try to get up toward Penn Station, which was at 33rd and 7th Avenue, and to get to a train to go back to New Jersey. So we left Nina's place. David wanted to go up to where he was staying on the Upper East Side anyway. So we decided to walk to Penn Station. But along the way, suddenly we discovered that there were buses that were running, and we took a bus to within a block of Penn, got off, walked to Penn Station. I got on a train and headed back to New Jersey. I learned from Karen that a close friend of ours, Karen had known since high school, Tom Painter, had come. He lived in New Jersey, and he had come to be with her, not knowing where I was and what was happening. And of course, once he learned, just stayed with her to be supportive. When I finally made it to our station in Westfield, New Jersey, Tom had driven Karen to the train station because she just didn't feel like she could drive. As I came off the train and across the platform and down the stairs, I heard our van pull up and went across the sidewalk and up the ramp into our van to get to hug Karen finally for the first time. As we compared notes later, we realized that we were both thinking the same thing all day. What else do they have planned that might cause us never to see each other again? But we were able to. And Tom was there, and the three of us just started to try to make sense of it. The next day, Karen suggested I might want to call the folks at Guide Dogs for the Blind because trainers had visited us there, and somebody would eventually remember that we worked there. So I called and talked to a variety of people. And they decided they wanted to put out a little news story if I didn't mind. And that little news story ended up resulting in an interview on Larry King Live and so many other interviews after that. The media took an interest in the story. And I realized that this was an opportunity to try to educate people about blindness, to try to educate people about what guide dogs do and what they don't do, to teach people that it isn't the dog that is the boss and the brains, it's really the individual, the person, but that it's a team effort. And also I thought it was an opportunity to help people move on from 9/11. And I decided if any of those things could happen, then it was worth talking about. Then I started being asked to speak about 9/11 and our events and our history and our experiences. And so I have been doing that. And if it helps educate people, if it helps people move on, if it helps stimulate people to be more proactive about demanding trust and making it happen, then it's worthwhile. And that's what it's all about for me. And so literally I travel the world and we talk about 9/11, giving people a sense of what occurred in hopes that it will keep us remembering some of the lessons, which is what we're doing today. If it helps us deal with all of the things that go on in our own lives, if it helps us become more positive and stronger, it's worth it. And all I ask you to do is to consider and move forward and work together to make sure that the good guys win, because that's what it's really about. Thanks very much for being here and for listening to our story. I don't know how many people need to leave or whatever, but if anybody wants to ask questions, we do have a mic, so raise your hand. I'm going to violate my own policy of never dealing with raising hands, but we do have a roving mic, and the mic rover can bring the mic to you. There is no question that is off limits. You can ask anything you'd like. I've had questions asked by the toughest experts in the industry, and that isn't people from the CIA and the FBI. It's third graders. Third graders will ask questions. They don't have any inhibitions at all. So I was speaking to a class one day, and after giving a little talk about my guide dog and so on, this little third grader gets up and he says, "How do blind people have sex?" So, you guys can't ask a tough question, so bring them on.
Any questions?
Don't be shy.
It's
What?
a very shy group.
What did you say? What? Oh, come on. The same way everybody else does. And that was the answer I gave him, and that's the best you're going to get out of me.
Doesn't look like we have any. Ah, good. Okay.
Somebody up in the scholarship section. Yes.
So you explained that when we're going down the stairs, it doesn't. When you explain it, it doesn't seem like it was really panicked. Or were people just walking down normally?
I wouldn't say they were walking down normally, but I think instinctively we all knew that we didn't dare panic, because if people started to panic, we would have had people trampling over each other and none of us would have gotten out. A lot of us worked very hard to make sure that there wasn't panic. I think it was tense, but it wasn't panicky. Because if there had been panic, it would have been disastrous for all of us. We didn't dare let that happen. I think we also had a situation where in New York, people are so used to being in crowded subways and walking down the stairs together and so on, so it worked out pretty well. I think that helped. But mostly, I think it was just because we all worked to keep panic from happening. I said earlier, I like information. I would have liked to have known what was going on, but I understand why they did not tell us, because that would have caused a panic, and that would have been very difficult for people. I'd want to know. If I had known, I probably wouldn't have walked on Broadway to get up toward Midtown Manhattan, and I wouldn't have been caught in the collapse of the towers. Next question.
I wonder if anyone in the audience wants to see a guide dog off, not working.
You've been prompted.
Yes, of course.
So when Africa or any of my guide dogs are in harness, they know they're supposed to be working. They know that they have a job to do, and they actually take it very seriously. In fact, it's a very stressful job because they want to please and they want to do it well. But at the end of the day, the harness comes off, and that's what you get. And you're welcome to go down unless she comes up and visit with Africa. But any other questions? Seriously? All right, you.
Some folks are coming down to greet Africa.
Well, yeah, it's all about the
Right.
dog.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
How long do you have a guide dog before you place it another?
It really depends on the dog and how old they are and when they need to retire.